move this over here. Hello, Julie. Welcome. Been a minute since I've been on this channel, unfortunately, but we're back. Let me get our music up, because I forgot to start it already. Today, we are going to continue Scum Villain, which it's been a minute since we've read that one. And we were at a very big break in the story, I guess you could call it. That should have music playing now. Last time, there was that whole kerfluffle between Luo Binghe and Shen Qingqiu. Lots of back and forth. He did this, did he do this? And it led to a big misunderstanding where Luo Binghe got really upset and lost control of his powers. And to save him, Shen Qingqiu sacrificed his life, which really upset poor Binghe. And we're going to see the fallout of that today, possibly. I don't remember when we see him again. Hey, Jeff, is it raining? No, I have my heater on because I'm very cold. Sorry, I hope it's not too loud. This mic is apparently really great. That's across the room. So, last time, Shen Qingqiu died. Luo Binghe was upset. Where do we go from here? Well, where we go is Chapter 44, Manual Rebirth. The Borderlands. Evening came with high wind, whistling through the scattered houses of the little garrison. On the entire street, only a single tea house had some warm yellow lantern light shining out from within, giving the place a bit of life. The so-called Borderlands wasn't the border between the two countries or two cities, but the common border between the demon realm and the human realm. The two races belonged to different worlds. Originally, there was even an endless abyss tearing through space between them, but there were always those few places where the boundary between realms was weak, where time and space were in disarray, and the residents of the two realms could often be seen scattering back and forth. Cases of someone maliciously stealing across the border also occurred from time to time. Not many common people were willing to live in a place where the demon race could emerge and vanish like ghosts, skulking around one day, then killing and burning the next. So signs of human life in the Borderlands would grow sparser and sparser. Even in a once prosperous city, once the dimensions of different realms began to intermingle, in the end there would be a mass migration, leaving only the disciples sent by the cultivation world to guard the Borderlands by themselves. Luo poured the newcomer a bowl of hot wine, chatting with a few others gathered around a stove. "Brother, where did you come from?" "The south." "Over there?" A few people looked at each other, showing expressions of understanding. "It must be hard there right now." The newcomer raised the bowl of wine and said, frowning, "Who said it isn't? There's a battle twice every 3 days. No one can endure this kind of torture." Someone in the corner cut in. Sangchong Mountain and Huanhua Palace both belong to the 4 major sects. Why are they making such a fuss these years? Their disciples can't meet even once without getting into a huge fight, and those 2 sect leaders won't even control them a little. Luo said, "How long have you been in this damn place where birds won't even stop to shit? You've gone too long without asking questions. It's precisely with the 2 leaders' tacit permission that the disciples have been fighting harder and harder." "Why's that? Luo Binghe, tell me about it." Luo cleared his throat and said, "It's complicated to explain. Do you all know who the current head of Huanhua Palace is?" "I heard it's some kid." Luo laughed coldly. "If Luo Binghe can be called a kid, then you and I have lived for nothing. This Luo Binghe is something else. He came from Sangchong Mountain sect and was even Qingjing Peak's Shen Qingqiu's head disciple. At the Immortal Alliance conference back then, he dominated the rankings. He could be called a sight." A listener said doubtfully, "If he came from Sangchong Mountain, why would he become the head of Huanhua Palace?" After the Immortal Alliance conference, Luo Binghe disappeared for 3 years. During those 3 years, no one knew where he went or what he did. At the time, Shen Qingqiu said he'd perished, so everyone believed he was already dead. Who could have known that 3 years later he'd make a grand comeback, even becoming an influential figure in Huanhua Palace, and force Shen Qingqiu to self-destruct on the spot in Huahua City? The newcomer said, I could never understand this. This Shen Qingqiu, was he wrongly accused, or did he deserve it? Lu Liu said, who can say? Sangchong Mountain there, of course, is united against outsiders, fighting anyone who says anything. They've always been like this, holding relation over reason, even with something as damning as the Anding Peak Lord Shang Qinghua fleeing to the demon realm. They won't let others talk about it. After the Huayu City incident, Huanhua Palace changed masters not long after. The old palace master went into seclusion, disappearing without a trace, and Luo Binghe took power in his stead, killing anyone who says anything. Someone muttered, all because of a dead man? Lu Liu said, this dead man has stirred up quite a few waves. Shen Qingqiu is from Sangchong Mountain sect, and was even the peak lord of the second-ranked peak. His body should definitely go back to Qingjing Peak to be interred with the former generations of peak lords. The problem is, Luo Binghe refuses to return the body. Everyone thought along the lines of whipping the corpse or putting it on display, and their hair stood up on end. If he refuses to return it, can't Sangchong Mountain take it by force? That Baijian Peak's peak lord is still around. Lu Liu shrugged. They can't beat him. What? Everyone's worldview was destroyed. In the eyes of the world, Baijian Peak had always held the position of undefeatable war god. That they can't beat him or whatever was truly unthinkable. Lu Liu said, you don't know? Ever since Huayue City, Baijian Peak's Liu Qingge has fought countless times with Luo Binghe, but he's never won once. And that's not all. Luo Binghe brought Shen Qingqiu's body back to Huanhua Palace, and not a few days later, he personally kidnapped Qian Sao Peak's Mu Qingfang. Someone said, Qian Sao Peak has always disregarded worldly affairs. They help the dying and heal the injured. How did they manage to provoke this devil incarnate? You're getting into the fun bits. If you can't follow everything, I'll try and tie it together once we get to a part where these people stop talking. Lu Liu said, Luo Binghe took him back to Huanhua Palace and told him to heal and revive Shen Qingqiu. He sighed. The man had been dead so long he'd gone stiff. What was there to heal? The newcomer said, when I saw the two fight, Sangchong Mountain always liked calling Huanhua Palace the Dogs of Demons. Why is that? Lu Liu said, this is because for some reason the entirety of Sangchong Mountain from top to bottom insists that Luo Binghe is a fiend from the demon race. Though numerous abbots of Jiaohua Temple have personally testified that within Luo Binghe, spiritual energy circulates normally, Sangchong Mountain insists on calling him that. They go back and forth, repaying grievance with grievance, and so the two sects build their feud bigger and bigger. From how I see it, one day their ships will capsize together and no one will survive. So, at the end, he didn't forget to comfort himself. Being sent to guard the border like us, free and idle, is actually a good thing. Hey, Delvin. Hey, Anna. Welcome. The person in the corner said, confused, I no longer understand what's going on with this master-disciple pair and these two sects. A grudge as deep as the sea is one explanation, but there is another kind of explanation, and this old Lu thinks this kind is more believable. Let me tell you all. Lu Liu was just about to launch into enthusiastic gossip when suddenly a burst of knocking sounded on the door. Alright, so, since they've stopped explaining, let's kind of tie up all that together and explain what's been happening. Back in the last couple chapters we read, Shen Qingqiu was on trial for a crime. The group that accused him of the crime and was holding him prisoner was Huanhua Palace. His group is Sangchong Mountain. They're his buddies. So they were saying, hey, he said he didn't do it. You can't put him in prison without a trial. Innocent until proven guilty. Blah, blah, blah. And then Huanhua was like, Luo Binghe says he did all this shit, and, he obviously lied about the guy being dead, so it's suspicious, blah, blah, blah. So they were fighting. Shen Qingqiu escaped. He accidentally dies. And so in the period after that, the two palaces never get on again. Luo Binghe manages to take over Huanpa Palace, which was the one that he was hanging out with, and he takes Shen Qingqiu's body because he's trying to heal him. He kidnaps the doctor from Sangchong, Mu Qingfang, who's appeared a couple half-dozen times, and Liu Qingge, Shen Qingqiu's old friend, has been trying to save his body so that he can finally be put at rest, and has been getting his ass kicked because the poor guy cannot win against Luo Binghe. And so that's where we are now, a stalemate, with one side trying to revive the body with no effect, and the other side trying to take it back with no success, and everybody's fighting all the time, and these people are just sick of it. Right. Everyone in the room immediately went on guard. All their mischief and exhaustion was swept away, and each readied their weapons and spiritual devices. The borderlands only had rare traces of human life, being abnormally desolate. Their squadron was the only one with permanent residence for the entire garrison. The ones who'd gone out on patrol wouldn't have returned so quickly, and the remaining residents, even more, wouldn't risk death by wandering outside in the middle of the night. No one inside responded, and after a while the wooden door went knock knock twice more. Lu Liu called out harshly, "Who is it?" Suddenly, a chill wind blew by and extinguished the oil lamps and candles on the table. The room instantly turned pitch black, leaving only the dull red light of the stove faintly burning. Casting through the window paper was the silhouette of a man carrying a sword on his back. The person called in a clear voice, "Liuge, it's me. It's too cold today, so I came back early. Open the door and let me warm up with a cup of wine." The others released the breaths they were holding and cursed. "Old Chin, you trying to die? Just knocking on the door without a word? If we didn't know, we'd have thought you were eaten by a ghost." The person outside the door chuckled. Lu Liu felt something was strange, but he couldn't catch on to what. He said, "Come in," and opened the door. A gust of cold wind swept into their faces, but there was nothing there. Lu Liu slammed the door shut. "Light the lamps! The lamps! The lamps!" The newcomer's hand trembled. He turned and formed a fire seal, and the flickering flame illuminated a few silhouettes. He'd yet to light a candle when he turned back around and stuttered. "Liuge, I want to ask you," Lu Liu said, impatient. "What are you dallying for?" The newcomer said, "In this room, there were only 6 people, right? So why am I seeing what looks like 7? Dead silence. Suddenly, there was an explosive cry. No one knew who moved first, but the screams and the sound of clashing weapons rose and fell. Lu Liu yelled, "Light the lamps! The lamps!" Everyone hurried to form fire seals, but they were too disordered. Flames flickered all over, silhouettes swaying back and forth, until their vision became disoriented, making it even harder to see who was who. Afraid to harm their own, everyone dared not strike too hard, making it easy for the thing that groped in to take advantage, like catching fish in turbid water. A claw here, a knife there. As Lu Liu was mentally cursing, something suddenly grabbed him by the neck. His eyes rolled back into his head and his feet slowly left the ground, unable to see what had grabbed him by the neck. Just when he thought his life would end right there, the door suddenly flew open and a whirling gale swept inside. Another silhouette charged in. No one saw how he fought, but Lu Liu heard a strange cry by his ear, like it had come from the thing holding him by the neck. Then its grip loosened. The 6 people in the room hadn't calmed from their fright yet, and some were already lying flat on the ground. That person snapped his fingers, and the oil lamps in the room all lit at once. He looked down and observed for a moment, then rose and said, "They're fine, just unconscious." The person was caked in black mud, like he'd just been excavated from a grave, and his face was covered in whiskers, densely concealing his facial features. Despite his figure being lean, his face was like a big bearded man's. Lu Liu finally stopped shivering and stared him up and down for a long time, before he cupped his fist and said, "Many, many thanks to this good sire for your assistance chasing away that creature." When it says cupped his fist, it's referring to, like, this. is a kind of very respectful, like, martial, I believe, way to bow in respect. I don't know if it's specifically related to martial arts or not, but it's what all the, like, fighting people do in the anime and the animated shows and the live action. They do this. So he's being respectful. This person slung an arm over his shoulder. This humble one has something to ask. Lulio said, "Please, ask." The other said, "What year is it?" Oh, hello, Lobsel. Hey, Liz. After Shen Qingqiu had tumbled his way down from the mountain, covered in mud, half rolling, half crawling, he really wanted to destruct airplanes shooting towards the sky 10,000 times. Destruct his spiritual body or his asshole, either was fine. Before, most of the methods he'd thought of for preserving his life actually involved faking his death. But what was the point of faking his death? Finding a puppet or a similar-looking person for faking the death while the original sheds their shell and flees? Television shows have played that to death. So, the method he used was dying for real. That day, he'd really and truly self-destructed, doing a good thing on the way, absorbing a large amount of berserk demonic energy in Luo Binghe's body. To say that his meridians had been ground to dust wasn't an exaggeration. Only by facing death could one return alive. Which it looks like is a... Oh, ha! It's from The Art of War, Sun Tzu. I'm reading that. I'm sure that it wasn't exactly translated the same way. That's the problem with trying to recognize quotations and phrases that are translated, because no two translators are going to actually translate them the same. You'll never remember. So yeah, Shen Qingqiu's back. He died for real, but he set it up so that he wasn't gone for good. That was the whole thing that him and Shang Qinghua were working on together. The Sun Moon Dew Mushroom was called the Flesh Mushroom, and the name was entirely literal. Though the mushroom wasn't very useful for cultivating, it still grew by collecting spiritual energy from nature, along with essence from the sun and moon. If you nurtured its sprout in soil rich with spiritual energy, cultivated it, meticulously shaped it, and watered it with blood and qi, once it matured, you could grow a living flesh body. The flesh body could grow, but it was impossible to create a soul using this method. That is to say, what was grown would be a soulless, empty shell, which couldn't be more suitable as a vessel. Plant a little Shen in the spring and harvest a big Shen in the autumn. It was no longer just a dream. But the dew mushroom wasn't a Chinese cabbage, something you could grow with fertilizer and water. Shen Qingqiu had destroyed a number of mushroom sprouts before he'd grown one that hadn't developed crooked. He and Shang Qinghua had long calculated the coordinates, carrying out a long-distance operation. Beneath the tallest building of Huaihua City, they'd set a transportation array, and at the time the sun was highest, Shang Qinghua would set an activation array on Sangchong Mountain. Once Shen Qingqiu's soul left his body, he'd be sent into the mature dew mushroom that had been buried deep in the mountains of the borderlands. 3 locations, 3 arrays. If you connect them with straight lines, they would form the most stable shape, an equilateral triangle. Reasonably speaking, it was absolutely stable, absolutely reliable. The only flaw was a certain person. Great Master. Airplane shooting towards the sky was truly too reliable. Though the flaws Shen Qingqiu had been worried about, like arms too large, legs uneven, or a crucial part forgot to grow, had not occurred, sure enough, using chemical fertilizer to mature the sun and moon dew mushroom had some side effects. Just after waking up, Shen Qingqiu had waited quietly for a while, but didn't hear that detestable Google Translate notification. He internally exploded with joy. The system hadn't appeared. Ha ha! The system didn't appear. This big shot's changed hardware and won't install a virus like you anymore. Ha ha! Though he could only be temporarily assured, he couldn't resist dancing in joy. Dancing in joy, his ass. His whole body was still buried in the ground. He couldn't move an inch. For a day he remained buried, gathering strength in his fingertips until he could finally move his limbs. Only then did Shen Qingqiu finally and shakily crawl out. The moment he broke through the ground's surface, he didn't have a chance to revel in the fresh air of freedom before planting face first onto the ground. His body wasn't listening to his commands again. He lay prostrate on the ground. He spent an entire day walking while doing radio calisthenics, right up until the evening when Shen Qingqiu's walking form finally felt like a normal person's. At least he wasn't putting the same arm and leg forward anymore. Just having to relearn how to body. That's such a funny idea. I can just imagine, like, an entire day of him just trying to stand up and, like, fall over bodily. Radio calisthenics are a thing that, I know Japan does, and I guess maybe China does too, where there's, like, radio broadcasts that walk you through exercises and stuff. So he's, like, copying old broadcasts he heard in the past in his head. I don't know. I guess I wouldn't know if we do that too, because I never listen to the radio. Originally, the human cast they'd used was based on his former appearance as Shen Yuan. It didn't compare to Shen Qingqiu's immortal poise, but it wasn't a bad mortal container, just it had a bit of listlessness. The listlessness of a worthless pretty boy idling his life away. But because, while growing the dew mushroom, he'd used some of his blood, there would still be some influence no matter what. When Shen Qingqiu tumbled to the side of a creek and used a sharp mountain rock to scrape away his whiskers for a look, the face still had 3 to 4 part similarity with Shen Qingqiu. He then pasted whiskers back onto his face again without a word. I'd like to know how he pasted the whiskers back onto his face. After finally managing to tumble his way down the mountain, he'd grabbed a passerby and asked. I love that he grabs them. What year is it? It's like that scene from Jumanji. Fuck, it's already been 5 years. He could understand if right after he woke up his body was uncoordinated or occasionally unable to move because he needed time to adjust to the new configuration. But only waking up after being buried for 5 years? What was this? Tsukomi is Tsukomi, but this body was practically bursting with spiritual energy. There's no explanation. Tsukomi is a term for the comedic style of the stand-up comedy where you have 2 performers, straight man and a funny man. So this is some kind of reference to comedy. I'm not entirely sure what it is. There's no explanation in the translation. Oh well. The original Shen Qingqiu's body, when without a cure wasn't causing trouble, was quite full of spiritual energy, but compared to this sort of sensation, it was like the difference between 2 bars of battery, still enough to use, and a full charge right after charging and pulling the cord. He could even directly say he was a generator. So remember, in his old body, he got injured and poisoned so that sometimes his body wouldn't work properly. Well, his new body's not cursed or poisoned or whatever you want to call it. Did this count as shedding his body and replacing his bones, changing his tendons and cleansing his marrows? Was this the drumbeat of him soon becoming OP too? You can tell he's dreaming. He's like, please let me be OP. So that whole phrase is actually an idiom that describes being reborn as a Taoist, as like a martial, like, chi circulation. Like, my body's reborn because I'm now practicing Taoism and I'm perfecting my body. But then he turns it at the end into I'm turning OP. After so many years, Shen Qingqiu felt for the first time he'd picked up a bit of a reincarnator's dignity, felt for the first time that his unskilled self was perhaps not dragging his seniors down in the regiment of transmigrators. When he focused again, Lu Liu was rambling. These few years, the demon race has been invading more and more. All sorts of demons, ghouls, and ghosts have been pouring into the human realm. A major battle is likely imminent. Oh, I haven't yet asked this distinguished master your immortal name. This humble one is the untalented Sengsheng Mountain Qingjing Peak Lord Shuya Sword Shen Qingqiu of the Central Plains, made a sudden turn before reaching Shen Qingqiu's throat. So close, he'd almost given them his old name. He couldn't think of another name at the moment, and after muttering for a moment, he resolutely said 2 words. Peerless Cucumber. I think they've... Oh, here it does say it. The happenings of the past were like smoke. From today forth, while walking in the Jianghu, he'd use this ID that had been all over the review sections for years. Jianghu is the term for the martial arts world, the world of the martial artists, and the Peerless Cucumber, I don't know that they've mentioned it before, maybe they have, was his username on the internet when he left reviews on books and things, so he's gone back to using his internet ID. After he spoke, Shen Qingqiu glided away, leaving only a room full of petrified people in his wake. After a while, the newcomer mumbled, "He just said he was peerless... What was it?" Lu Liu guessed, "Peerless chrysanthemum? Was it peerless crown?" No. It was peerless mad flower. These are all probably jokes based on the fact that Yes, all those in Chinese vaguely sound similar to what he said, but of course he said cucumber, not any of those things. I think Peerless Cucumber is probably a dick joke, but I don't know for sure. Shen Qingqiu had walked several tens of feet away. His feet slipped out from beneath him. I also forgot to mention the reason I think it's probably a dick joke is because Shang Qinghua's username, airplane shooting towards the sky, is definitely a dick joke. I know I read about it somewhere. It's airplane shooting to the sky is supposed to be like, you know, woo! Did it! Anyway, so I think his name is probably just as puerile. Perhaps he should think about it some more later and go by a different name. The first step in starting an all-new life would, of course, start with Shen Qingqiu's most familiar procedure. The first prop he needed was a folding fan. A folding fan with a white silk base with an ink wash painting of mountains and rivers. Shen Qingqiu snapped the fan open and waved it before his chest, long hair and whiskers flying. Perhaps the image wasn't very good, being slightly unsuited to the prop, but that didn't matter. With a folding fan in his hand, he had a lethal weapon for playing cool. Shen Qingqiu placed one foot on a mountain rock and said, "Speak. Exactly what are your intentions in infiltrating the human realm?" I love it. His first thought, he doesn't have to be the mask of Shen Qingqiu anymore, because up till this point he's had to play a role, pretend to be someone that he's not. Now he can be himself, and what's his first thought? Is to grab onto the safety net he had as Shen Qingqiu, the fan he got so attached to. I think that there's an interesting kind of identity play in this story where the lines between him and the character he plays blur a bit, and he kind of ends up taking his favorite parts of the role and adapting them into this new self that he develops. But of course it will take quite some time for him to actually get comfortable and get there. Chapter 45, Demon Culture. So now we know that the people that were all talking last time are actually demons. There was a crowd of trembling people. Demons crammed before him. Though he said this, from their appearance alone, there was basically no difference. Shaking with fear, the frontmost said, I messed up that. The frontmost one said, usually we only steal small trinkets from the human realm and take them back to trade. The demon realm didn't have a common currency, so they often traded. If something caught their eye, they'd trade for it. Otherwise, they wouldn't. With the demon's craftsmanship levels and artistic tastes, an ordinary piece of embroidery would be considered a top-notch artisan product. So all kinds of trinkets from the human realm were actually very popular with them, and the least valuable were the various crystals with special effects that were a dime a dozen in the demon realm. But being a dime a dozen in the demon realm didn't mean there wasn't a market for them in the human realm. Oh, hello, Maddie. Welcome. Shen Qingqiu snapped his fan shut. You know what? Actually, I should... one sec. My mother and I have been going through our house and getting rid of things very, very slowly after the move last year, getting this house in order, because it's just too much stuff to get rid of and get in order. And we found this. which I remember very distinctly from my childhood. I don't remember where we got it, maybe some kind of fair or something, but I was very attached to it and was like, oh my god, it's like a fan. I don't know that it's actually supposed to be any kind of culture. I think it's, I don't know, it's just a fan with a peacock on it, but I should totally use the fan when I'm reading Shen Qingqiu. They actually sell some fans on Taobao, which is the Chinese website with a lot of merchandise for these books and things, and I'm very tempted to buy one of Shen Qingqiu's fans. It seems right. Let's see. Shen Qingqiu snapped his fan shut and solemnly said, this fan does not snap. It does not snap. This remote and destitute town, where neither birds shit nor chickens lay eggs, has poor production, a stagnant economy, and the level of people's happiness is lower than average. It's wrong for you to prosper from their misfortune. The minor demon was at a loss. He remembered the moment he was captured, this lofty master had also been stealing, borrowing clothes, and the fan he was happily fanning himself with, too. Shen Qingqiu thought, I was compelled by my circumstances. Surely you couldn't expect him to wander around in clothing that had been dug up from the dirt like a savage. However, this actually opened up his line of thought. If he could supply these minor demons, who'd only ever dared steal around, with an honest channel for small goods, perhaps people within this world that revolved around cultivation and monster fighting could establish a new frontier based on amassing fortune and farming. Shen Qingqiu irresponsibly fantasized for a while, and felt that if he were to accept underlings, they needed to understand each other's way of living. He said amiably, Do you eat rotten flesh? The minor demons shook their head. Shen Qingqiu was about to sigh in relief when the leader effusively said, My father said that only the rich and influential can afford rotten flesh. Shen Qingqiu said, Enough. It wasn't a question of economic level at all, okay? After climbing to the top of the demon realm, Luo Binghe was more than influential, right? How come he'd never been seen enjoying this kind of thing? After a pause, he changed his question. What's your name? The first one replied, 6 balls. Shen Qingqiu asked, The meaning? 6 balls replied, When I was born, my father held me and said I was 6 balls heavy. Okay. Apparently this is not a name, but it's a joke in that it's grammatically correct as a phrase, but it sounds nothing like a name. It's another language joke. There's quite a lot of those in Chinese, and not all of them translate well, but 6 balls does sound like a funny name. What balls? Shot put balls or ping pong balls? This kind of name was absolutely meaningless. The rest of the demons scrambled to give their names, each one more unbearable than the last, but they seemed to take pride in them. Are the names chosen by demon commoners all this literal? Family names didn't exist in demon culture, so the names they chose were daring and audacious, bold and unrestrained. You could tell at a glance that these generals with names who left people speechless, such as Elder Skyhammer or Elder Single Arm, had started as nobodies and climbed up from there. But if they came from nobility, such as Mo Beijun, Sha Hualing, or Luo Binghe's father Tianlang Jun, their naming situation was a little better. Jun is a honorific for nobility, royalty. I'm gonna double check this real quick. I can't type.
You don't show it? Why do you do this?
I'm pretty sure it is. I will have to double check, but I remember reading somewhere that the reason that these characters, Tianlang Jun, Mo Beijun, is because they're royalty, and also explains why they have that name, even though the demons only have, like, one name. It's not their, like, first last name, it's title. Shen Qingqiu suddenly thought it was fortunate Luo Binghe hadn't been tossed into the demon realm and found there. If he'd been taken in by demon commoners, according to this style of naming, he might have been given a name that looked like his parents hated him. What would he be called? Jade-faced little playboy? Evil demon incubus spirit? No, it should be something more earth-shatteringly terrifying. He remembered that in the original some girl had bashfully expressed that Luo Binghe's that was very that. With an uncountable harem and innumerable trysts, he could easily shoot, no matter the place. Even after eons, the gun would be unfellable, as vigorous as ever. In truth, the name Peerless Cucumber suited Luo Binghe well. But since he'd already taken it, then Luo Binghe might as well be, Heavenly Pillar. Fuck, Heavenly Pillar. How exhilarating. Let's see what it explains. Okay, I think just Heavenly Pillar is just another goof on ya dick. Obviously, he's, Shen Qingqiu had been laughing for a while when he suddenly gave himself a slap. Oh, the fuck is wrong with you? Getting carried away, using the great master protagonist to come up with a tasteless, dirty joke in your head? What's so funny? Have you gotten straight who that nastiness should be directed towards? The minor demons watched this lofty master first laugh so hard he fell to the ground and then slap himself in anger, and were mystified, not even daring to breathe loudly. Then Shen Qingqiu abruptly stopped smiling and pressed his fan into Six Ball's shoulder, pulling him closer. Shen Qingqiu plucked a sword tassel from his waist. Where did you get this? It was a sword tassel, but it was no ordinary sword tassel. This belonged to the #1 female lead, Liu Mingyan, svsss sword tassel. An item the male and female leads would exchange as love tokens, understand? Back then, at Sangchong Mountain, Shen Qingqiu had gone as far as to take special notice. It didn't need to be too distinctive. How had this thing fallen into the hands of a minor demon in the borderlands? Terrified, Six Balls responded, "This wasn't stolen. I found it." "Get on the streets and find me one more then, if it's so easy," Shen Qingqiu said. "Where did you find it?" Six Balls said, "These days, an important person always occupies the roads at night, first sending subordinates to clear the way. We were a little curious and hid by the roadside, and then afterwards we found this on the road." The important person the minor demon described must have been someone at the pinnacle of the demon realm. This type of character wouldn't frequently enter the borderlands and draw attention. In fact, the environment here was often unsuitable for them. Exactly where am I getting the hiccups from? Exactly which important person would occupy the roads with a swagger, and even leave behind an item Liu Mingyan kept with her? The first possibility Shen Qingqiu thought of was, of course, a certain someone. He asked, "The important person you're talking about, was it a good-looking young man?" He thought for a while, then decided against suppressing his conscience and changed his words. "Not just good-looking, he's very good-looking, especially good-looking. Fair skin, pretty face, tall. He doesn't smile often, but when he does, it's very dark." Six Balls shook his head, then suddenly blushed. "Why are you blushing?" Shen Qingqiu interrogated him for a while, but couldn't get any answers. He pondered internally that it likely wasn't Luo Binghe. Luo Binghe had Shin Mo, and it was a super crazy, ridiculous, huge cheat that broke all the rules. With a casual slice, it could cleave the space between the two realms. With a stroke, you could open a passage for yourself and enter the demon realm. He'd never expend so much effort, even making a special trip to the borderlands and faithfully following the ways of smugglers. If so, a problem arose. Demons had passed through the area, yet left behind Liu Mingyan's belongings. Could it be that Liu Mingyan had slipped up and been captured? He didn't remember Luo Mingyan as the #1 female lead suffering this treatment in the original work. Which dumbass, insignificant bandit would dare touch Luo Binghe's wife? Though the Liu siblings normally cultivated on their own peaks, the original work mentioned their relationship was quite good. Perhaps their sibling bond only seemed distant because they weren't the clingy type. But no matter if it was as Luo Qingge's little sister or Qi Qingqi's beloved disciple, Shen Qingqiu couldn't stand by and do nothing. So yeah, remember that Liu Mingyan is Luo Qingge's sister. I don't know if she's younger sister or not. I don't know. Moreover, at this time, the system should already be, temporarily, unable to threaten him, and there was no worries about restrictions, massive deductions of points, or whatever. So why not go check it out? Shen Qingqiu said, "Where is the rift in the boundary between realms?" At midnight, Shen Qingqiu hid in the treetops with all traces concealed, overlooking the area below. After an unknown length of time, a certain patch of air began to visibly distort. Shen Qingqiu's eyes lit up. He held his breath, attention rapt, and saw a young youth in black rush out. They were a great distance away from each other, but Shen Qingqiu's eyes were incredibly sharp and he could see him clearly. The youth was around 17 or 18 years old, with a tense expression on his sharp and handsome face. Shen Qingqiu actually found the face somewhat familiar, just couldn't remember where he'd seen it, but he was certain he had. Suddenly, from the silent night came a crisp female voice, both sweet and cold, echoing through the forest. Baijian Peak's disciples are truly exceptional. Your body's bound by 100 immortal binding cables, yet you're still able to wipe the floor with a great many of my subordinates and flee for this long. I truly can't slack off for an instant. On hearing this voice, realization suddenly hit Shen Qingqiu. A demon who was beautiful, of noble background, and had subordinates, who a minor demon would blush at mentioning. It was Sha Hualing. Sorry, no matter what, this girl was one of the female leads, but she hadn't had a presence for too long. He'd pretty much forgotten about her. If Luo Binghe had fallen into her hands, her fate was even more worrying. Slashing up her entire face would be going easy on her. No wonder this youth's running posture had felt off then, and his body seemed slightly heavy. Shen Qingqiu had only looked at his face. Now he continued looking downward. It turned out there were numerous thin silver wires bound around him. From the color of his robes, it really was someone from Baijian Peak, but he had no impression of ever seeing such a young disciple before. The youth knew he couldn't beat his opponent in speed, so he abruptly braked, his eyebrows furrowed fiercely. If you want to fight, let's fight! A flash of red gauzy cloth, and Sha Hualing walked over with swaying hips, emphasizing her figure, and then said, full of smiles, "It took me so much effort to catch you. How could I bear to fight you? Quickly, why don't you come back with me?" The youth's temper was violent, and he spat at her. Sha Hualing said, "You won't. I won't damage your spiritual body, but chopping off an arm or leg or whatever won't damage it either." As she spoke, her right hand reached out to grab the youth, but before she could touch him, an odd tremor suddenly traveled in from her fingers. Sha Hualing thought she'd fallen for some trick of the youth's and quickly withdrew. Raising her hand, she looked. Her 5 red cinnabar-painted nails had been evenly trimmed a length shorter. It was only her nails and didn't hurt in the least, but Sha Hualing's blood at once went cold. She shouted, "Who's there?" If there was someone here who could cut her nails with ease, they could effortlessly cut her neck, too. Shen Qingqiu was feeling much more relieved. He released a twig plucked clean of leaves. This man loves hiding and playing with trees. In truth, he just wanted to scare Sha Hualing a little, and while he was at it, having her nails so long wasn't good, really. Every time Shen Qingqiu saw, he was worried they'd break. It made him extremely uncomfortable, and they would often scratch Luo Binghe's back into a bloody mess. Even if airplanes shooting towards the sky liked this kind of hardcore flavor, even if Luo Binghe's healing ability wasn't human, it still didn't mean this was a proper healthy lifestyle habit, alright? For a straight man, this man is so obsessed about this dude's sex life. I love you, man. Sha Hualing's killing intent immediately rose. With a whirl of red cloth, a mass of chilling demonic chi came forth. Gathering it around her fingers, she struck at the youth. The maiden wasn't scared stiff, but scared angry instead. She truly was a character. Shen Qingqiu had no choice and leapt down from the treetops, dropping in between the two. He gathered energy in his hand and fired a spiritual blast, meeting Sha Hualing directly. He'd known this body was full to bursting with spiritual energy, but he hadn't thought it was bursting to this extent. Their palms had yet to connect when Sha Hualing flew straight away like a repelled magnet, and at the same time, Those skimpy clothes tore once more. Though it was a bonus, Shen Qingqiu had always insisted on the rule of don't look at any bonus from women in this world with above-average looks, and censored it himself. Xia Hualing was also more than direct. Last time, she'd let out some vicious words. This time, having weighed their strengths, she didn't say anything for the occasion and just dropped into a roll. She rolled into the patch of distorted air, and her form vanished at once. Shen Qingqiu tossed his fan several times, channeling spiritual energy into it and transforming the fan into a blade. With a flip of his hand, he sliced, and the immortal binding cables fell into 100 or so pieces. The youth made a presentable act of cupping his fist and said, "Many thanks to Senior for the rescue." Shen Qingqiu also made a presentable act of asking, "You're a disciple from Baijian Peak?" "I am." "Under who?" "My master is the Baijian Peak Lord, Luo Binghe." Shen Qingqiu was astonished. Luo Binghe never accepted disciples. On that Baijian Peak of his, at most there were people of equal seniority to him. Otherwise, there were the disciples under those of equal seniority to him. The person himself wasn't interested in teaching disciples. Though what Baijian Peak called teaching a disciple was just especially beating the person up. Shen Qingqiu had some slight suspicions. "What's your name?" The youth answered, loud and clear, "Yang Yishuan." "Like I said, he looked familiar. I'd definitely seen him somewhere before." 5 years was enough for a young child to grow up. Shen Qingqiu looked Yang Yishuan up and down, thinking that Luo Binghe had sworn he wouldn't accept disciples because it was too troublesome. But in the end, he'd accepted one. If you don't remember, when they were in the village with all the creepy people, dead people, where the disease that made them like turn melty and flesh melt off and dead, there was a kid named Yang Yishuan who wanted to become a warrior and admired Luo Binghe and wouldn't leave him alone. And now he is Luo Binghe's first and only disciple. Yang Yishuan said, "Senior?" Shen Qingqiu asked, "How's your Shizun been all these years?" At their parting in Huayue City, Luo Binghe had lost to Luo Binghe, and it must have been quite a blow. Shen Qingqiu felt he absolutely must ask after his Shidi's current situation. Remember, Shidi is like a younger brother in the sect of martial arts, and Shizun is like a teacher figure in the martial arts. They're affectionate terms. Yang Yishuan said honestly, "Defeated in every battle." For the Baijian Peak Lord to be associated with the phrase defeated in every battle, it truly struck one with overwhelming terror. Shen Qingqiu said, "Who did he fight? Luo Binghe?" Yang Yishuan humphed. "Other than that little beast, who else?" Shen Qingqiu's expression twisted slightly. Yang Yishuan himself was quite a bit younger than Luo Binghe, yet he still called him little beast. Who did he learn this from? He didn't know that now, when the entire Sangchong mountain sect mentioned Luo Binghe, it was always little beast or demon fiend or ingrate. Calling him by his name and adding a "this bastard" would be considered courteous. Shen Qingqiu said, "How did you fall into that demon woman's hands? Her words just now were a little strange. What does 'how could I bear' mean?" Yang Yishuan's face immediately flushed red. If that demon woman hadn't used such devious methods, first disguising herself as a woman who'd fallen into misfortune, then when I became suspicious, suddenly taking off, I definitely wouldn't have fallen into her trap and been captured. He understood in an instant. Shen Qingqiu lectured. Look at yourself. Do you look like someone from Baijian Peak? Avoiding feminine charms doesn't mean fearing them. So what if she took off her clothes? So what if a maiden took off her clothes before you? Back then, when your Shizun went to fight succubi, the entire cave was filled with those without clothes. Of course, at the time, he'd been there, and it's true that he'd also suspected Luo Binghe was either asexual or perhaps impotent. Hey, Akatsuki, welcome. Yang Yishuan's face was filled with longing admiration. An entire cave, as expected of Shizun. Then he said curiously, "Senior knows my master well? Otherwise, how could you know my Shizun fought succubi?" Shen Qingqiu coughed once. Old affairs. He's very bad at pretending to be someone else. Getting back to the main topic. Xia Hualing hadn't only captured Yang Yixuan, she'd likely also captured Liu Mingyan. To capture Sangchong Mountain sect's disciples in such a high-profile manner, it looked like there could only be one reason. Something had gone wrong with Luo Binghe. Luo Binghe's cultivation system was an extremely unscientific one. It was like his left and right hands needed to do separate tasks simultaneously in order to combine two systems that naturally rejected each other into one. This meant his spiritual and demonic chi must check and balance each other. However, with Shen Mo's involvement, his demonic chi would surge and the balance be lost, not operating in harmony. Am I playing something later? Not today. I'm having to move a bunch of boxes. Ugh. I'm having to adjust my room to make room for a litter box in my closet, and moving all my eBay shit somewhere else is gonna be exhausting. But we'll play something tomorrow. Chapter 46. Commotion in the Demon's Lair. In order to resolve the issue, the method Luo Binghe employed was to look for human vessels. When the moon was full, he'd search for someone with strong spiritual energy and pass the excess demonic chi in his body to them. In exchange, he'd absorb the greater part of the other's spiritual chi. Like this, the balance would naturally be achieved. However, because Luo Binghe's demonic chi was far too overbearing, the human vessel would often be crippled after the energy transfer. Generally speaking, these extraction vessels were limited to a single use. Of course, Luo Binghe wouldn't do the demanding work of capturing human vessels himself. Xia Hualing would of course store people in cages for him to pick as he pleased. No extra words needed. Luo Binghe only needed to use Shen Mo to cleave open a passage into the demon realm on the night of the full moon and grab a person to use. The sad thing was, in the original work, Xia Hualing had gone to all that effort, and then Luo Binghe had gotten with 3 beautiful nuns from Tianyi Monastery that she'd personally selected. As one can imagine, Xia Hualing nearly went mad with anger. Shen Qingqiu asked, "While you were captured, did you see anyone else? Where were you held?" Yang Yixuan shook his head. "As soon as we entered the rift between realms, we were in the lair of that demon woman, Qi Yun Cave. I was shut in a single-person cell and didn't see anyone else." Shen Qingqiu tossed and caught Liu Mingyan's sword tassels several times and said, "My guess is you weren't the only one captured." He thought for a bit, then decided to take a look. In any case, tonight wasn't the full moon, so not time for the extraction. Luo Binghe was away, busy stirring up havoc and exciting chaos in the human realm. He probably wouldn't come looking to meet with Xia Hualing. And saving Liu Mingyan, who shouldn't have appeared here in the first place, wouldn't count up as messing up the plot, but rather correcting it. Yang Yixuan hurried to catch up. "I'll come too! My sword is still in that demon woman's hands." Shen Qingqiu asked, "You're not scared she'll take off her clothes?" Yang Yixuan said disdainfully, "There's no way I'm scared. Besides, throughout that entire trip, she took them off dozens of times. There's nothing remarkable about it anymore." Shen Qingqiu turned around, speechless. "So the reason she shut you in a single-person cell was so she could strip for your eyes? What an unbelievable bonus! Young man, if you continue at this pace, you'll definitely die to the male lead. I'm so worried. This is Liu Qingge's sole disciple." Passing through the spatial rift was like passing through a gushing flow of warm water. Once they re-emerged, they were in demon territory. On the human side, it was already past midnight, but on the demon side, twilight had only just fallen. The air was particularly arid. After standing there a moment, Shen Qingqiu felt a bit dizzy, like he was suffering from altitude sickness. As far as the eyes could see, there seemed to be little difference from the human realm, just that the trees were a little sparser. Looked like their greenification efforts were a bit lacking. Yang Yixuan led the way. They passed through craggy stones and soon found the opening of Qi Yun Cave. "It's an honor to see you at last, this cultural landmark of the demon race, and seeing it personally sure was unique." It was in the demon race's nature to prefer darkness. Most of their permanent and temporary residences were all located underground. Looking at the entire entrance, it appeared to be an exceptionally splendid mausoleum. Shen Qingqiu thought, "You tell me, a big pile of stone, a tablet erected in front, and 3 characters in twisty red calligraphy on it. What could it be, if not a tombstone?" He cupped a handful of spiritual energy, ready at all times to mess up any enemy who might show their face. But since the start of the tomb passage, since descending from the entrance, he didn't see any guards. And after thinking about it, it made sense. Only demons ever snuck into the human realm to throw their weight around. What humans would suicidally run over here? There was no need for guards. The two stealthily moved deeper after passing through the stone corridors. They arrived at a large hall. The hall was carpeted with the intact skins of all kinds of strange beasts. At first glance, they still seemed alive. Xia Hualing was currently barefoot, treading back and forth on a huge tiger skin spread on the floor of the hall. Shen Qingqiu was worried that Yang Yixuan would recklessly make a sound and alert her. Just as he was about to remind him, he saw the child had sensibly shut his mouth. Reassured, he turned back around. On both sides of the hall were numerous cages, each holding tightly bound cultivators in different colored uniforms. Some looked extremely young, but he also saw veterans. Some were drowsily nodding off, and some were glowering in fury. Xia Hualing walked over to one of the cages, arms crossed, and said, "You people from Sangcheng Mountain Sect are really both troublesome and annoying. Capturing 2 of you took so much effort, and one even escaped before he could be shut inside." She clenched her teeth. If not for, I'm really itching to break all your legs." In the cage, Luo Binghe sat with her veil covering her face, her eyes closed and her legs crossed, impervious to outside matters. Xia Hualing saw she was being ignored and smiled coldly while saying, "The thing on your face, don't you ever take it off?" "Oh, I see. Could it be that your face is too ugly and you dare not take it off out of shame?" Shen Qingqiu thought, "Girl, do you know who you'll envy most in the future? To say she's ugly is thoroughly hitting yourself in the face." Her woman's intuition was acting up. No matter how Xia Hualing looked at Luo Binghe, she irritated her. She opened the cage and dragged Luo Binghe out, yelling, "Kneel!" Luo Binghe was naturally unwilling to kneel. Though she was completely without spiritual energy, she still stood firm. Xia Hualing pushed and shoved, but was utterly unable to make her bend her knees. Enraged to the point steam was coming out of her ears, she hauled the veil off her face. In that instant, Xia Hualing's delicate, snow-pale face became even more snow-pale. Shen Qingqiu roared internally, Turn around! Turn around! I want to see! Quickly, let me see what the most beautiful woman in the book looks like!" These years, he'd been mindful of his status. He couldn't just say, "Hey, Shiji, I heard you're pretty, so I wanted to look at your face, may I?" This sounded like what a pervert would say when sexually harassing someone. Having spent so long unable to see her face, he felt like he was about to burst! Shiji is a martial nephew or niece, so another way to refer to her as kind of martial arts family. But before Luo Binghe could turn and let him experience the joy of a first glance, malice flashed through Xia Hualing's eyes. Her fingers curved into claws, shooting towards Luo Binghe's face. She absolutely couldn't allow Luo Binghe to see a face even more beautiful than hers. So the second time she was sent flying that night, Xia Hualing finally couldn't stop herself from coughing up a sullen mouthful of blood. A self-consoling thought suddenly flashed through her mind. At least my clothes weren't damaged this time. I don't need to change again. Although Shen Qingqiu had sent her flying, she'd still clawed 5 gashes into his sleeve. Shocked, he thought, "Didn't I trim these fingernails an hour ago? They regenerate without limit?" After tossing Xia Hualing away, he promptly turned his head to look at Luo Binghe, his feet slipping out from under him as soon as he did. Such a short time, and she'd immediately put her veil back on. What was wrong with letting him have a glance? I love these moments where he goes back to being fan of the book, rather than person living in the story. Yang Yixuan found his sword stabbed within a seam in the rocks, and had already started hacking at the chains on the cage doors with matchless speed, a throng of cultivators swarming out with each chop. Shen Qingqiu saw 3 navy blue silhouettes out of the corner of his eyes and said with great alarm, "Stop, stop! Don't do anything impulsive!" Confused, Yang Yishuan turned his head. "Is something wrong, senior?" The words had barely left his mouth when Shen Qingqiu saw he'd opened the cage at hand, and 3 dainty Taoist nuns with faces like they'd been cast from the same mold rushed out of Qi Yun Cave like 3 whirlwinds. "Buddy, by haphazardly releasing everyone like this, you've released some people who shouldn't have left. You've released the 3 sisters responsible for settling Luo Binghe's demonic qi long term." The blunder had already happened. Shen Qingqiu's heart flooded with tears, but it wasn't like he could run after them and stuff them back into their cages. There was no other way. He could only join in and release people. As he freed them, he sighed and lamented. He was dead. He'd actually managed to ruin that plot thread, the first meeting between the male lead and 3 members of the harem. In a freak accident, he'd messed up the scenario of them fooling around and cultivating together. He could only place his hope in the hard-working employee Xia Hualing bravely going back to war, recapturing them to present to Luo Binghe. It was criminal! Criminal! Shen Qingqiu was still wallowing in remorse when he lowered his head and suddenly found himself looking at a familiar face. His heart gave a thump. Fuck. It truly was an unlucky year. You really couldn't avoid your enemies. Cho Haitong was huddled in the cage, staring at him with a bewildered expression. Shen Qingqiu froze for a couple seconds, then feigned ignorance. He motioned for her to hurry out, then nonchalantly turned around. With his current appearance, no one should recognize him. In addition, 5 years ago, countless pairs of eyes had witnessed the scene of Shen Qingqiu self-destructing. There was nothing to worry about. That's the lady who accused him of murder way back when. After coughing up blood, Xia Hualing remained sprawled on the floor in a daze for a while, then finally struggled into a seated position with great difficulty. She focused her gaze, then yelled, "It's you? Who the hell are you? You actually dared follow me here? You have some guts!" Yang Yishuan looked like he'd suddenly thought of the question as well and said on the side while setting people free, "Oh, right. Senior, who are you?" "Oh, right my ass. Young man, your reaction is really too slow. What's with the tone? Like you're only asking in passing?" Shen Qingqiu was considering whether to announce himself with the title of Peerless Cucumber when Xia Hualing humphed and smiled. "Whatever, since you're already here. Don't think you'll be able to leave." She clapped her hands, bells jingling around her wrists. After a moment, from all around them, Qi Yun Cave's guard regiment finally flooded into the hall. Qi Yun Cave was Xia Hualing's private residence, so her regular underlings weren't there, and these useless troops were nothing to fear. These minor demons circled round and around them, raising and lowering their arms, looking exactly like one of those voodoo dance rituals. Shen Qingqiu was mystified by the sight. I think this is referring to... let's see... it's referring to a specific kind of ceremonial folk dance from Manchuria, and they translated it in English to voodoo, which I think they I wouldn't have done it that way, but I guess I get what they're going for. Shen Qingqiu was mystified by the sight, currently impatient. He was preparing to send them all flying with his fan when suddenly it seemed like there were countless strands of hair all over him, constricting his movements. Immortal binding cables. Even though these miscellaneous troops didn't have much fighting ability, they were clearly trained. With each holding a hair-thin immortal binding cable, they circled him non-stop, winding him into a giant ball of string fully twined in immortal binding cables. Xia Hualing hadn't managed to cheer in victory before Shen Qingqiu laughed, then violently stamped the floor, the air filled with the sound of snapping strings. They burst. The immortal binding cables had been utterly burst by this person, flooding it with spiritual energy. Most people were so terrified they completely forgot the task at hand. This really was the first time they'd seen someone who could use spiritual energy to simply burst through the immortal binding cables. What a simple and brutal method of freeing oneself! Shen Qingqiu yelled, "Just run!" The freed cultivators didn't need extra encouragement. Most of them were already long gone. Yang Yixuan and Luo Binghe had struggled free of the immortal binding cables, the circulation of their energy still unstable. Knowing they would only get in the way if they stayed, and seeing that Shen Qingqiu should be able to handle things, they retreated, leaving only a "senior, take care." Seeing this, the underlings didn't know whether or not to chase them and remained stuck in place, waiting for their superiors' orders. Xia Hualing, with a strange gleam in her eyes, pointed at Shen Qingqiu and shouted, "Catch him! Don't worry about the others, just him! Hold him down even if you die trying!" Shen Qingqiu sent the few miscellaneous soldiers who threw themselves at him flying with his fan when suddenly something heavy pressed down on his head. A giant net. Countless immortal binding cables, each the thickness of a pinky finger, had been woven into a giant net, pelting down onto his head. When it fell over him, its weight alone caused Shen Qingqiu's knees to fold, and he nearly fell flat on the ground. Where do you get this sort of unnatural prop? For every cable to be this thick? You sure it's binding for immortals or for elephants? Xia Hualing waited a while, and only after seeing that Shen Qingqiu was indeed unable to struggle free this time, slowly approached. Her previously wretched state had been cleanly swept away. Xia Hualing felt that she had completed a momentous task and was completely content. Even her reprimands took on a coquettish tone, chuckling as she said, "If 100 immortal binding cables can't hold you down, why wouldn't I use 1,000 or 10,000? This immortal binding net wasn't originally prepared for you, and yet it was used on you, so you should feel extremely honored. Don't flail about. As long as you behave, I won't do anything to you." Shen Qingqiu said, "If you won't do anything to me, can I trouble you to withdraw the net?" The demon race's star employee, Xia Hualing, had begun her grand missionary speech once more. Crouching down, she said mainly to herself, "It looks like you were blessed with extraordinary talent. If you were to surrender and pledge yourself to my race's banner, power and glory would be within your grasp. Of course, even if you won't pledge yourself, it doesn't matter. What should be done must be done. Some suffering will be unavoidable. You should consider carefully." No wonder Xia Hualing had ignored the others just now and concentrated all her firepower on him. Luo Binghe needed spiritually powerful human vessels, abundant in spiritual energy. Of all the cultivators she'd captured, could any be more spiritually powerful than him? So, this brat was planning to offer him to Luo Binghe as a human vessel. Releasing the 3 beautiful flowers was purely a thoughtless mistake. Shen Qingqiu had certainly never planned on filling in the deficit himself. This feeling of having accidentally picked up the wrong script made him feel vaguely like that scam of a system was still there. He was thinking up escape plans when Xia Hualing suddenly fixed her slightly messy hair and with a swing of her hips forged ahead out of the hall. From far away, Shen Qingqiu heard the sound of her soft and delicate laughter. "My lord, tonight isn't the night of the full moon. Why did you think to visit the subordinate? However, you came at just the right time. As it turns out, I've prepared a special gift for you. It's already here." In a split second, a flood of hot blood mixed with cold sweat surged to Shen Qingqiu's head. Not knowing where he got the burst of explosive power, he grabbed the side of the net, sending the bottomless pool of spiritual chi in his body outwards in the form of a spiritual blast. Bang! A giant boom sounded. Xia Hualing's smile froze on her face at once. She sprinted back to the inner hall in a panic and immediately stared tongue-tied at the sight. In the middle of the hall, all of Qi Yun Cave's minor demons were sprawled every which way, all over the ground. In the center of the immortal binding net, there was an immense hole, its edges still sizzling with flashing sparks, and wisps of white smoke drifted through the air. This person was truly too terrifying. He'd utterly blasted a huge hole in the immortal binding net. He was gone. The person behind her passed her and strolled into the hall. Qi Yun Cave was lightless and dim. Only a straight and slender silhouette was visible, along with the subtle silver light reflecting off the embroidered patterns on his black robes. After a moment, Luo Binghe spoke, with a tone that was neither pleased nor angry. "And this is your special gift?" Xia Hualing said bitterly. "Due to a momentary miscalculation, I let him get away." Her distressed heart was dripping blood. An immortal binding net woven from thousands of cables, originally meant to be used on those stinking cultivators from Sangchong Mountain sect, had ended with a large hole blown through it just like that. This wasn't something she could sew and patch up with a needle. Luo Binghe's back was facing her. He lowered his head and looked over the wreckage, saying coldly, "I seem to have told you that people from Sangchong Mountain sect are off limits." Drops of cold sweat dropped down Xia Hualing's forehead. Luo Binghe had indeed told her such, but the spiritual energy levels of Sangchong Mountain sect's disciples were generally higher than the spiritual energy of other sects' disciples by a good amount, so they were the most suitable as human extraction vessels. Holding on to wishful thinking, she'd still captured a few, thinking that maybe she could switch their clothes and slip them through undetected, not expecting that somehow Luo Binghe was still able to tell who she'd captured, even after they'd all fled. Internally, she couldn't help but feel her blood run cold, and said hurriedly, "Don't be angry, my lord. I accidentally captured 2 of them, but released them after. This time, this subordinate found someone exceptional. I've never seen a cultivator with more abundant spiritual energy. With that one person, you'll no longer need to switch to a new vessel every month." She bit her lip and added, "As long as you give me a certain thing." After waiting for a moment, she suddenly extended her hand to catch the object tossed her way. Securely grasping it in her palm, she showed a determined smile. Dun dun dun! That is chapter 46. And so we have begun the next arc of the story. Shen Qingqiu is alive again, and unfortunately has stumbled right into Luo Binghe again. No, it's not. It's not sex disciple, S-E-C-T, and then S, sects disciples, disciples of a sect. It just sounds like sex when you say it too fast. I swear I try. I every time I say that word, I think it in my head. I think, don't say sex, don't say sex. It never seems to work. Sex. You add the S on the end, it just sex. We need a new word for martial arts group. We need, I don't know, club? Gang? I like martial arts club. Thanks for listening. I won't be doing another stream today because I've got a lot of stuff to catch up on, but tomorrow we'll be doing 2. Bookend game. Don't know what game yet. Someone was kind enough to buy Bayonetta for me, but I gotta get a bigger memory card for my Switch, so working on that. Bookstore is open. Silent Hill 2 book is up. All books are finally out. All the backup is gone, thank God. So check out that if you'd like. Follow me on social media. Join the Discord to hang out with us and watch movies and stuff. I've been uploading some films and things for us to watch since Discord won't let me use my DVD player. I think that's everything. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.